Being able to analyze a primary source is a key component of doing archival research into any topic. In this video, we will discuss the steps of conducting a document analysis with primary sources. The first step in conducting a document analysis is to determine whether you are looking at a primary or a secondary source. Primary sources are material that contain first-hand accounts of events. They were created by someone who lived through a specific time period or event. Primary sources can be contemporaneous to the event or period, for example, a letter or diary entry recounting an event, or later recalled by an eyewitness, such as in an oral history or a memoir. Primary sources come in many formats and include both text-based documents like publications, letters, or diaries, and visual materials like photographs. By contrast, a secondary source is a second-hand account created by someone who did not live through the time period or event of study. Secondary sources rely on other sources of information and often comment upon primary sources. For example, I'm a historian in 2024 and I'm writing a book about the early history of the University of Connecticut. While I might include primary sources in my book, like an excerpt from the diary of a student or a faculty member, or an image of campus, since I didn't live through the period that I'm studying, my book would be considered a secondary source. In this video, we will focus on analyzing a primary source. The next step in a document analysis is to gather clues from your primary source document. First, look for basic information, such as what type of document are you looking at? Can you find the year in which the source was created? Can you identify where the source was created? And can you identify who created the item? Gathering this information may require you to look at resources beyond the document in front of you. For example, you may be able to learn more about the creator of the source or the time period from a collections finding aid. Using the clues you have gathered, you can begin to build the context that this source was created in. Ask yourself what was happening in history during the time in which this source was created. What social and cultural factors may have influenced this source? To learn more about the historical, social, and cultural context, you may need to do additional research using secondary sources, such as historical non-fiction books, encyclopedias, or textbooks. Primary sources reflect the creator's point of view and background, which was shaped by their historical, cultural, and social context. This means that all primary sources will have some kind of bias based on the experiences and beliefs of the source's creator. When analyzing a primary source, it is important to be aware of the potential biases of the item's creator. To help you identify bias in a primary source, ask yourself the following questions. Who do you think is the main audience? What clues can you gather about the authors of these materials? How might the authors have influenced the creation of these items? Is this item addressing issues that are relevant to a particular group? How can you tell? Is the language being used derogatory towards a particular group? Archives also exhibit bias in the types of materials they collect. For example, for a long time, archives were most interested in collecting the records of prominent straight white men, which means that archives weren't collecting the records of other groups, such as women, people of color, and LGBTQ individuals. When analyzing primary sources, it is just as important to analyze who is missing from a source or group of sources as it is to analyze who is reflected or represented in a source. We call these missing voices silences in the archive. To help you identify silences and gaps, you can ask yourself the following questions. Whose voices are represented in the items? Whose voices are missing? Do you feel that you are represented in the source you are looking at? Why or why not? If this source shows a specific point of view about a historical event, is it possible to find an alternate point of view? In this video, we've broken down a document analysis of a primary source into 4 steps. First, determine whether the source you are analyzing is a primary or secondary source. Then, gather clues or basic information about your source, such as the year it was created or the author. Next, use the clues you have gathered to build the historical, social, and cultural context in which the source was created. You may need to look to outside sources for help in learning more about the context. Finally, assess your source for biases, silences, and gaps. The clues you have gathered and the context you have identified can help you to spot biases, and be sure to ask yourself who is included and who is missing in your source. Document analysis is a key component of doing research on a historical topic, but document analysis is just one piece of the research puzzle. As we talked about in this video, you'll also need to help contextualize a primary source with secondary sources, and you may need to seek out additional primary sources to try to find missing voices or to include a diversity of perspectives from a certain time period.